The clock on Claire Harmon's phone read 11:47 p.m. when the email arrived. She was standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her office on the 34th floor of Harmon Tower, looking down at the wet streets of Chicago below when the notification lit up her screen. Emergency board, vote 6 a.m. tomorrow. Motion to remove CEO. She didn't move. She didn't make a sound. She just stood there, the glow of the city reflected in the glass, holding the phone like it might detonate if she set it down. Behind her, on the marble floor, a thick binder of financial documents lay split open. Pages fanned out in every direction as though someone had thrown it across the room. Someone had. She had. The documents were forgeries. She knew it. But knowing hadn't stopped her hands from shaking. And just as the silence in that office became something almost unbearable, a sound drifted in from the hallway, the slow metallic roll of a cart with a squeaky wheel, moving steadily along the corridor outside. Before we go any further, if you've ever believed that the right person shows up at the right moment, even when they don't wear a suit or sit behind a boardroom table, take a second right now to hit like on this video. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that ordinary people can do extraordinary things, and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one, because sometimes the person who changes your life is the very last one you'd ever expect. Claire Harmon had not always been the kind of woman who ended up alone on the floor of her own office at midnight. There had been a time not so long ago that she couldn't still picture it when this building had felt like proof of something. Proof that she had been right, that the sacrifice was worth it, that 18 years of relentless, sometimes brutal discipline had produced something real and lasting and hers. Harmon Biotech had started in a rented office in Lincoln Park with 4 people, 2 laptops, and a business plan that 3 venture capital firms had passed on before a 4th took the chance. Claire had been 32 years old. She had not slept more than 5 hours a night for the better part of a decade after that. She had missed holidays and weddings and her own wedding anniversary more times than she could count, and eventually her husband had stopped counting along with her. The divorce had been quiet, almost dignified. That was the worst part. There had been no fight left in either of them by the end, only the tired acknowledgement that she had chosen something over him, and they both knew what it was. But the company had survived. More than survived. $2.3 billion in valuation, a staff of over 900 people across 4 facilities, a pharmaceutical research pipeline that 3 university hospital systems described publicly as essential. She had built all of it. She knew every floor of this building, every contract, every investor relationship going back to the beginning. She had earned the right to stand at those windows and feel, if not proud exactly, then at least certain. Certain that the foundation was solid. Certain that what she had made was real. Tonight, the certainty was gone. Marcus Webb had been with her from the very beginning. He was one of the 4 people in the original office photograph, the one that still sat in a silver frame on the corner of her desk. Marcus, laughing at something off camera, 28 years old and full of a confidence that had seemed, at the time, like it could build anything. She had trusted him with the finances of this company for 18 years without hesitation, without auditing, without the kind of defensive suspicion she applied to almost everyone else in her professional life. He had been the exception. She had given him the CFO title, the equity package, the corner office 2 doors from hers, and the kind of institutional authority that only comes from proximity to the person who actually built the thing. She had defended his judgment in board meetings. She had backed his compensation requests. She had, more than once, ignored a nagging sense that something was slightly off in his accounting explanations because she didn't want to believe that the one person from the beginning was capable of what the feeling was suggesting. And tonight, without a word to her in advance, without a conversation or a warning, or even the basic courtesy of a confrontation, he had sent every member of the board a bound dossier, claiming she had embezzled $4.7 million from the company's research endowment fund. The documents looked real. That was the part that kept turning in her stomach. Whoever had created them understood exactly how Harmon Biotech's internal accounting architecture worked. The subsidiary routing codes, the approval stamps, the intercompany transfer protocols. If she hadn't known with absolute certainty that she hadn't done this, she might have believed the documents herself. She called her attorney at 11:15. Voicemail. She called the company's outside legal counsel. Voicemail again. She scrolled through her contacts for 20 minutes, looking for anyone who would pick up at midnight on a Tuesday, and what she found instead of a name to call was the quiet, devastating understanding that there wasn't one. The divorce had taken the couple friends. Her own intensity had taken the rest. She had spent 18 years building something other people admired from a distance, and had managed, in the process, to build a life with no emergency contacts left in it. She sat down on the floor. Not in her chair. On the floor, back against the side of her desk, cold marble seeping through her blazer, looking at the photograph above her 4 young people who had believed, genuinely and without irony, that they could change something worth changing. Her eyes rested on Marcus's face for a long moment. Then she closed her eyes. Out in the hallway, the cart with the squeaky wheel was getting closer. Daniel Pruitt had started his shift at 11 p.m., the same as every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. He signed in at the service elevator in the basement, collected his cart mop, bucket, the standard spray bottles, a vacuum with a fraying power cord he'd submitted 2 replacement requests for, and rode up to 34. The overnight rotation covered floors 34 through 36, and he had the route memorized down to the approximate minute. Home by 6:50, in time to start Noah's breakfast before the school bus. Before this job, he had been a mechanical engineer at a manufacturing company in Naperville. He had designed load-bearing chassis frameworks for diagnostic and surgical equipment. Precise, technical, unglamorous work that he had genuinely loved. The pay had been good. The people had been decent. He had expected to spend most of his career there. Then his wife, Renee, had been killed by a distracted driver on a Wednesday morning in March 2 years ago. She had been dropping Noah at school. Noah hadn't been in the car, he'd had a fever and stayed home, and Daniel had spent many hours in the months that followed, sitting with the particular arithmetic of that one fact, turning it over without ever being able to decide if it made things better or worse. After the leave ran out, after the grief counselor had done what she could, after his mother had stayed for 6 weeks and his sister for 3, Daniel had found himself alone with Noah and had understood, in the way that settled facts settle, that the most important thing he could do was be present. Reliably, every single day, without the unpredictability of a demanding career with long hours and last-minute travel, he had found the janitorial position through a staffing agency. Fixed hours. Solid benefits. He was home before Noah woke. It was a choice. He had made it deliberately and with clear eyes, and he had never let himself feel ashamed of it, even on the nights when the building was very quiet and very large around him. He turned the corner into the executive corridor and saw the light still burning in the CEO's office. That was unusual enough to slow his pace. He pushed the cart to the doorway and stopped. The woman sitting on the floor with her back against the desk did not look like someone who controlled a $2 billion company. She looked like someone who had reached the edge of something and hadn't found the ground on the other side. Papers spread across the marble around her in every direction, financial documents, by the look of them, though he didn't try to read what they said. Blazer still on, shoes still on, eyes closed. Not asleep, he could see it in the careful set of her jaw, the deliberate stillness of someone working very hard to hold a particular shape under significant pressure. He knocked lightly on the door frame, just to let her know she wasn't alone. She opened her eyes. Dry, she hadn't been crying, and something in her expression made clear she didn't intend to be. She looked at him the way people look at someone they've never actually registered before, and said, in a voice calibrated for boardrooms, "I don't need this room cleaned tonight." Daniel nodded. He started to back the cart away. Then he stopped, reached into the insulated bag clipped to the cart's side, and set a paper cup of black coffee vending machine. Floor 32, no sugar because that was the only option on the floor just inside the doorway. He didn't explain it. He didn't ask if she wanted it. He set it there and walked away, and he didn't think too hard about why he'd done it. It had seemed like the only honest thing. 20 minutes later, Daniel was running the mop in long, even passes across the terrazzo floor of the hallway adjacent to the small conference room near the east stairwell, when he heard the voice, low and measured, coming through the gap where the conference room door was pulled almost shut but not latched. He didn't recognize it at first. He registered it the way you register a sound that doesn't fit, slowing the mop without quite knowing why. "The accounting documents are done," the man said. A pause, the asymmetric silence of a phone call. "Her signature looks exactly right. They spent 2 weeks on it. By the time anyone pulls the actual records, the vote will already be over." Another pause. 6 a.m. It goes through at 6 a.m., and after that, whatever she says doesn't matter. A brief, quiet laugh. "I've been patient for 10 years. I've more than earned this." The soft sound of a call ending, footsteps moving to the far window. Daniel stood still in the hallway. He was the overnight cleaning staff. He had no formal standing in this building beyond the maintenance contract his agency had signed. He understood that with the clarity of someone who had been on both sides of the invisible lines organizations draw around themselves. If he walked into someone's office and said he'd overheard a senior executive through a barely open door, the likeliest outcome was polite acknowledgement and nothing further. He might be told that what he'd heard was taken out of context. He might be thanked for his concern and escorted out of the building before his shift ended. He might, and he considered this, honestly be the subject of a complaint that ended his contract. He knew how these things worked. He had no illusions about what weight his word carried against a man in Marcus Webb's position, in a building like this one, at this hour. But there was also a woman sitting on the floor 30 feet away who did not know that someone in this building had spent 2 weeks manufacturing evidence against her. She was sitting in the wreckage of a plan she hadn't made, with no one to call and no way out she could see. She didn't know, and he did. He hadn't chosen to know. He had just been in the hallway at the wrong moment, or the right one, depending on what he decided to do with the next 60 seconds. He thought about Noah. The conversation last month, when Noah had come home with the quiet that meant something was bothering him. A kid in his class had been blamed for breaking something he hadn't broken, the teacher too busy to look closely. Everyone had moved on, and Noah had asked, very seriously, "Dad, do you think you should try to fix something even when it's not your problem and it might not work?" Daniel had put down what he was doing and said, without needing to think, "Yes, every time you have the chance." Not because it always works out, just because walking away from it doesn't, either. He turned the cart around and went back down the hall. He knocked on the CEO's doorframe again. She looked up, and this time her expression had moved past wariness into something flatter, the face of a person operating on whatever was left after everything else had been stripped away. "I think there's something you need to hear," Daniel said. "I didn't mean to hear it, but I did." She studied him for a long moment. "Come in." What followed was not comfortable. Claire Harmon did not trust strangers, and she wasn't about to start at midnight on the worst night of her career. She sat up straight, arms crossed, and listened to him with the focused, slightly adversarial attention of someone fact-checking a story in real time, watching his face for the places where it didn't hold. When he finished, she said nothing for a beat. Then, "Who sent you?" "No one sent me." "Marcus hired you?" "Someone on the board?" "I clean floors 34 through 36, Daniel said, without heat. "I have no relationship with Marcus Webb or anyone on the board. I heard a man on the phone through a door that wasn't closed all the way, and I'm telling you what he said. You could have misheard." "I could have," he said. He didn't argue it or dress it up, but I didn't. She held his gaze, he held hers. He didn't perform innocence or urgency or try to sell her on anything with his expression. He just waited, the way you wait when you've told the truth, and the truth is all you have to offer. "Tell me again," she said. "Every word, in order." He did. He had a precise verbal memory. 14 years of engineering work had trained him to store exact language, because the difference between the right specification and an approximate one could mean a structural failure, and he repeated the conversation without adding to it, without editorializing, just the words in the order they had been spoken. Like a man reading from a document he happens to carry inside his head. She listened the second time with different eyes, leaning slightly forward, her gaze in the middle distance where she was running the information through whatever internal framework she used to assess what was true and what had been constructed to look like it. When he finished, she asked quietly, "Why didn't you just leave? Nothing would have happened to you." He thought about how to answer that. He said what was actually true, because she had asked genuinely. "I have a son. He's 9, and I've told him probably 100 times that when you have the chance to do the right thing and you walk away from it, you carry that. It doesn't go away. I didn't want to carry this one." The room was very quiet. The city hummed 34 floors below. "Okay," Claire said. She stood from the floor, and when she did, she was the CEO again. The posture, the focus, the rapid precision of someone shifting from endurance into action. That conference room has an internal CCTV camera, rolling 48-hour backup on the building's full system, but I don't have server access after hours. "Building maintenance does," Daniel said. "Floor 35. Secondary server closet. My card opens it." She picked up a USB drive from her desk drawer and met his eyes. He met hers. Neither said anything further. They just started moving. The 35th floor, at 1:20 in the morning, had a particular quality of stillness, not silence, but the quiet of machines doing their work without anyone watching, the soft mechanical respiration of server racks and climate control running through the night. Daniel led the way, his access card opening each security door with a short beep that sounded very loud in the dark. Claire moved through behind him, close enough that he could hear her breathing slow and steady itself, not calm, exactly, but the managed version of calm that people build when they need to function. At the secondary server room, he held the door. Claire moved to the terminal and navigated the internal CCTV archive with the efficiency of someone who had helped design the system she was now working around. Her fingers moved fast across the keyboard. She knew exactly what she was looking for. While the file populated, the room was quiet enough that the absence of conversation became its own presence. Daniel filled it the way tired people do. "Does your family live in the city?" he asked. He wasn't sure exactly why. It seemed like the kind of thing a human being would ask. She paused in the typing, a brief hesitation, barely perceptible. "I don't have kids," she said. Not with sadness. More the tone of a fact made peace with long ago, and tonight is the clearest evidence I've had in a while that there's no one I would call. Which tells me something. He didn't offer comfort he didn't have. He was quiet for a moment and then said, "Running a company alone at midnight. I don't think most people understand what that actually looks like." She glanced at him sideways, not searching for anything, just registering that he'd said something true without trying to make her feel better about it. Something in her expression shifted slightly. Not relief, something quieter. "I have it," she said. The screen had resolved. Marcus Webb was there, face clear, phone pressed to his ear, entirely unaware the room was recording him. She turned on the audio. His voice came through the small speakers, the same words Daniel had repeated to her twice now. On camera, 47 seconds. She inserted the USB drive. The file transferred. Her right hand was flat on the desk beside the keyboard, and Daniel could see the slight, barely controlled tremor in her fingers, not fear. The release of something held under pressure for too long. She pulled the drive and closed her hand around it. She exhaled long and slow and turned to look at him, and for the first time all night, she didn't have a ready expression. just the quiet face of someone for whom language hadn't caught up yet to what needed to be said. "You should try to sleep a few hours," he said. That, somehow, was the thing that almost made her laugh. They walked back toward 34 through the dark corridor, and somewhere between the server room and the elevator bank, the concentrated urgency of the last 2 hours settled into something quieter. Two people moving through an empty building at 2 in the morning, tired in the specific way that comes from having done something hard and then found nothing left to do but wait for morning, Claire asked. Somewhere near the elevators, the question she should have asked hours ago. "What's your name?" "Daniel Pruitt." "Claire Harmon." "I know," he said. Something close to amusement moved through her expression. She asked about his son, and he found himself talking about Noah the way parents talk when someone actually asks, not performing parenthood, just describing a person he found genuinely remarkable. Noah was 9, seriously interested in dinosaurs in a way that had moved, over the past 2 years, from hobby into something resembling academic commitment. He had strong opinions about Cretaceous period taxonomy that he was entirely willing to defend. He hated Brussels sprouts with a focused intensity that Daniel found disproportionate but somehow endearing. He set the table every night without being asked 2 plates now, though for the first several months after Renee died it had always been 3, and the quiet moment of correction, when Noah noticed and removed the extra plate, had been one of the hardest small things Daniel had lived through. Claire listened without the polite, slightly glazed expression of someone waiting for their own turn to speak. She actually listened, and when Daniel finished, she smiled, not the careful professional version he'd seen in the lobby articles, but a real one, small and tired and genuine. "He sounds like a genuinely good kid," she said. "He's the whole thing," Daniel said. She was quiet a moment. "What did you do before this?" "Before the building," he told her. "Mechanical engineering. Medical equipment systems. 14 years of structural design work in Naperville." He watched her face as he said it and saw something register, a small, quick calculation moving through her expression, but she didn't say what she was thinking. She filed it and kept walking. They reached the executive corridor door. He stopped with his cart. She stopped with the USB drive in her pocket. Whatever this strange, unlikely, completely unrepeatable thing had been between them was at its natural end. "Thank you," she said. The word had real weight in it, the weight of someone for whom gratitude doesn't come easily, and who was saying it anyway because it was the only true thing left. He nodded. "Get a little sleep," he said, and picked up the handle of his cart and continued his route. She watched him go, the unhurried, self-possessed way he moved through the building's empty hallways, taking up exactly the space he needed and not performing anything for anyone, and she stood there for a moment longer than necessary, with something moving through her that she couldn't quite name yet. The board convened at 6:05 a.m. in the 42nd floor conference room. Of the 12 members settling into chairs around the long glass table, not one of them had slept particularly well. Marcus Webb was already seated at the far end, his suit freshly pressed, his expression carrying the practiced calm of a man who had waited a very long time for a specific moment and had finally allowed himself to believe it was here. He had a leather portfolio open in front of him. He had a glass of water. He had, Claire noticed when she walked in, arranged his materials with the comfortable authority of someone who considers the room already his. Claire Harmon arrived at exactly 6:05. She had not slept. She had changed into the spare blazer she kept in the closet behind her credenza, washed her face, and spent the remaining hours thinking with the careful precision of someone mapping every variable in a known system. She did not look like a woman who had been on her office floor at midnight. She looked like the CEO she was, Senator Diane Holloway, 61, former state legislator, the board's longest-tenured independent member, sat 3 chairs from the head of the table, reading her phone when Claire entered. She looked up with an expression that revealed nothing. Marcus opened with measured gravity, distributing the printed, bound version of the financial dossier, the same documents, now given the legitimacy of physical weight and careful binding. He walked the board through the alleged discrepancies methodically, the subsidiary routing irregularities, the authorization signatures, the internal memos that looked exactly like internal memos because someone had spent 2 weeks making them that way. He was very good at this. Claire had always known he was good at this. She had relied on it for 18 years. When he finished, he set his hands flat on the table. Given the severity of these findings, the board has a fiduciary obligation to act. May I respond? Claire said. Several heads turned. Something recalibrated behind Marcus's eyes, a brief, involuntary adjustment, like a man who expected a door to open one way and found it opening the other. Of course, said the board chair. Claire did not look at the documents in front of her. She looked at the presentation screen on the wall and reached into her jacket pocket. She set the USB drive on the table, plugged it into the HDMI input, and said, I'd like the board to watch 47 seconds of footage, captured last night at 12:12 a.m. by the internal camera in Conference Room B on the 35th floor. I'll play it once. She pressed play. The room went still in the way that rooms go still when something genuinely unexpected is happening, not polite attention, but structural stillness. 12 people who had stopped breathing at approximately the same moment. Marcus Webb's face on the screen was clear and unmistakable. His voice came through without distortion. The words were the words. Every single one. The 47 seconds ended. The screen went black. The silence that followed was the longest Claire had ever heard in that room. Diane Holloway set down her pen. She looked at the blank screen. Then she turned to Marcus Webb with the expression of a long suspicion finally confirmed. I've known you for 20 years, Marcus, she said. Her voice was entirely steady. I've had doubts about you for 10. Thank you for settling it. She turned to the board chair. I'm ready to vote. The vote was 9-3 in favor of retaining Claire as CEO. Marcus Webb was suspended pending a full internal investigation before he had left the building. 3 dissenting votes came from members who, the subsequent investigation would determine, had each received personal financial arrangements from Marcus over the preceding year and a half. The investigation took 11 days and was thorough in the way investigations are when a subject has been careless because he believed he'd already won. What it found was this. Marcus Webb had been in private negotiations with a German pharmaceutical conglomerate called Rhine Dynamics for 22 months. Rhine Dynamics had been attempting to access Harman Biotech's proprietary drug delivery platform technology, the core intellectual property underpinning the company's entire research pipeline, and had been rebuffed through official channels twice. Marcus had approached them directly, in his own name, and had negotiated a personal payment of $40 million in exchange for facilitating the acquisition under new, cooperative leadership. The sole condition of the arrangement was that Claire Harman had to be gone before anything formal could proceed. He hadn't hated her. That was the part Claire found herself sitting with on a gray Thursday morning, the investigation report open on her desk. He hadn't resented her, or felt wronged by her, or carried any wound she'd given him. He had simply looked at what she'd built, understood its value to the right buyer, and calculated that $40 million was worth 18 years of shared history. She tried to decide whether that was better or worse than if he had hated her, and found she couldn't get there. Some people were never the person you believed them to be. They were just waiting for the number to be high enough. She had him brought to an empty conference room on the day his badge was deactivated. Not for any practical reason, everything was settled. She did it because she owed herself the clarity of looking at him without the board table and the performance between them. He arrived, looking reduced, not remorseful. She studied his face carefully and didn't find remorse there, but smaller, the way people look when the structure they were relying on has been removed. He sat across from her and said, almost conversationally, "You'll never know how you found that video." "I know exactly how I found it," she said. Surprise moved through his expression, genuine and unguarded. Then it was luck. It wasn't luck, she said. That was always your mistake, Marcus. You built everything on the assumption that no one would stay, that everyone, given the chance to walk away, would walk away. That's a very specific kind of blindness. He looked at her. She looked at him. Then he stood and left, and the door closed behind him with a soft, final click that sounded nothing like the ending of 18 years. It sounded like any door closing in any building on any ordinary afternoon, which was almost the strangest part of it. And then Claire Harmon, alone in the conference room with the city 34 floors below, sat down and let the tears come. Not from fear, not from grief, exactly, though some of that was in it. From the long accumulation of the past 24 hours, and from something more specific, the fact that at the very bottom of the worst night she'd had in years, when she had run out of people to call, a man she'd never met had knocked on her door and done something that no one had asked him to do, and no one would have blamed him for skipping. She hadn't known people like that still existed in the building she spent her life in. Or perhaps she had simply stopped being in the rooms where they showed up. That afternoon, at 4 p.m., Claire walked down to the 34th floor. Not for a facility review, not for any professional reason that would have made sense if someone had asked. She walked down because there was something she needed to do, and she had spent enough of her life waiting for the right moment to do things. A few people noticed. None of them said anything. Daniel was in a small conference room at the end of the corridor, stacking chairs against the wall in neat, precise rows. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway, and his expression was the same as it had been at 2 in the morning present, unhurried, without any performance. She walked in and set an envelope on the conference table. "I'd like you to open that," she said. He looked at it without picking it up. "What's in it?" "A job offer. Facility engineering manager. Full benefits, medical, dental, vision, with dependent coverage for your son." She named a salary 3 times his current rate. "The position has been open for 3 months. I've interviewed 9 candidates. None of them were right." He was quiet for a moment. "And now you think you've found one?" "I know I have." He looked at the envelope, then at her. "Is this because you need someone for the role?" he said. "Or because you feel like you owe me something?" It was exactly the right question, the only honest question, and she had come to understand somewhere in the long hours of this strange week that he was someone who asked the right questions. She made herself sit with it genuinely rather than reaching for the ready answer. "Both," she said. "I won't pretend otherwise, but the answer to both of those things is you. That's not guilt. That's a fact." He was still for a moment. Then he reached out, picked up the envelope, and held it without opening it. "I need to talk to my son first." She nodded. She understood that this was how he made decisions, not impulsively, not under pressure, but in the right order, with the right person consulted first. "Take whatever time you need," she said. He looked at her with something she hadn't had directed at her in longer than she could place the simple, unguarded regard of one person taking another seriously. Not calculating her, not managing her, just seeing her. "Thank you," he said, "for coming down here yourself." She found, to her own genuine surprise, that she was smiling. Not the managed expression she'd spent years calibrating for rooms that required it. A real one, small and tired and entirely unguarded. "I should have done it sooner," she said. 3 months later, Daniel Pruitt's name was on a placard outside an office on the 22nd floor of Harmon Tower, and the building's equipment systems were running with a consistency that 3 previous department heads had never achieved. It turned out that a man who had spent 14 years designing the structural load-bearing frameworks of medical equipment had very specific and practical ideas about how such equipment should be maintained. His team of 6 reported to him morning and evening. His preventive maintenance schedule reduced emergency repair requests by nearly 30% in the first 8 weeks alone. Noah Pruitt was selected for the Harmon Foundation's annual STEM Scholars Program, a competitive initiative for students in grades 4 through 8 across the greater Chicago area. The selection had been made on merit alone, by a committee that had no information about his father. His application essay was titled, "What Dinosaurs Teach Us About Engineering Failure," and it had been passed among the 5 committee members before the deadline because none of them could stop thinking about it after the first read. One had written in her evaluation notes, "This child thinks with genuine originality and should be given every resource available to him." On a Tuesday afternoon in late April, Daniel and Noah were carrying their trays through the company cafeteria on the 8th floor. Noah visiting on a school holiday, when Daniel spotted Claire at a table by the windows, eating alone the way she apparently always did, a folder open beside her plate, her eyes moving between the document and her phone. He said something to Noah. Noah thought about it for 4 seconds. Then he picked up his tray and walked over. "Would you like to sit with us?" he asked. Directness ran in the family. Claire looked up. She looked at Noah, really looked at him, and then at Daniel, who had followed a step behind and was watching with the quiet patience of someone who had learned not to rush anything that mattered. "Yes," she said, "I would." Noah settled in across from her and ate in comfortable silence for approximately 45 seconds, his maximum. Then he looked up and said, with the casual confidence of someone sharing self-evidently important information, "Did you know that T-Rex was actually much slower than most movies show? Scientists think it mostly walked rather than ran, because of the biomechanical stress sustained running would have put on its skeletal structure." Claire set her fork down. She turned to face him with her full, undivided attention. "I didn't know that," she said. "Tell me more." And Noah did, at length, with enthusiasm, with specific citations from 2 papers he could partially quote from memory, with the conviction of someone who has been waiting his entire life for exactly this audience to appear. Claire asked follow-up questions. Real ones, not polite ones. The distinction was visible, and Noah, who was 9 and already quite good at telling the difference, sat up a little straighter each time she asked. Daniel ate his lunch and watched the 2 of them across the table and felt something moving through him that he had almost stopped expecting to feel. Not happiness exactly, because happiness was too simple a word for it. Something quieter and more durable than that. The particular piece of a future that is no longer a source of dread. The recognition that the people around this table, on this unremarkable Tuesday afternoon in a company cafeteria with mediocre coffee and fluorescent lighting, are exactly the right ones. The understanding that sometimes the worst night of your life is also the night everything turns, if someone decides to knock on the door instead of walking past. Harmon Tower still stands at the corner of Michigan and Wacker, 34 floors of glass and steel rising into the Chicago sky. The lobby is marble and light. The elevators are fast. The 34th floor is the same as it always was: executive corridor, conference rooms, the wide windows looking south toward the lake on days when the sky is clear enough to see it. But in the small conference room near the east stairwell, there is a camera that recorded 47 seconds on a Tuesday night in October that changed 2 lives and whatever is quietly beginning between them. The person who thought to look for that footage was not a lawyer or an investigator or anyone whose job description included protecting anyone. He was a man with a mop cart and a son he was raising alone and a memory for exact words, and he had no particular reason to stay in that building a single minute past what his shift required. He had every reason, if he was thinking about it in the small and self-interested way the world sometimes encourages, to keep moving and let the night close over what he'd heard and leave it there, undisturbed, the way people leave things that are not technically their problem. He stayed anyway. He knocked anyway. He told the truth, offered nothing else, and asked for nothing back. Some things cannot be explained by utility. Some things can only be explained by the kind of person someone is. Alone in the ordinary dark, when no one who matters is watching, and the choice carries no reward and no guarantee. All you have is the example you are quietly setting for the child you are raising who is learning. From every small and invisible decision you make, what kind of world it is possible to live in and what kind of person it is possible to be.